The entire Orpheum Grand Orchestra vanished from their concert hall in Chicago on October 26, 1988. One moment, 98 musicians, led by their brilliant conductor, Ilara Vance, were in the middle of their final dress rehearsal. The next, they were gone. The stage was left empty, instruments sat in their cases, and half-empty coffee cups grew cold in the dressing rooms. No ransom note, no signs of a struggle, just an impossible, silent absence. For 37 years, the case remained one of the most baffling mysteries in American history, a chilling piece of urban folklore. The case was cold, the families were broken, and the truth seemed lost to time. Then, in 2025, a demolition crew preparing to tear down the derelict concert hall made a shocking discovery inside the very walls of the building. What they found would not only solve the mystery of the vanished orchestra, but would also reveal a truth so monstrous, so meticulously planned, that it would shake the city to its core. The silence was about to be broken. The Orpheum Grand Orchestra was more than a collection of musicians. It was a family forged in the crucible of shared ambition. At its heart was Ilara Vance, a conductor whose talent was as fierce as her loyalty. At 34, she was a prodigy, a force of nature with a baton who could coax sublime, heart-stopping music from her ensemble. Her hair was a wild storm of black curls, often escaping its pin as she threw her entire body into the music, her eyes alight with a fire that ignited every person in the room. She wasn't just their conductor, she was their champion. She had fought for better contracts, secured funding against impossible odds, and knew the name of every musician's child. She believed this orchestra, composed of hopeful young virtuosos and seasoned players who had been overlooked by larger symphonies, was on the cusp of greatness. Their upcoming debut at the newly renovated Orpheum Grand was meant to be their coronation, the moment they announced themselves to the world. Among them was David Chen, the principal cellist. He was quiet, observant, and possessed a razor-sharp mind that extended beyond music theory. He was the orchestra's union representative, a man who read the fine print. His wife, Sarah, was expecting their first child, a son. David's dream wasn't just to play on the world's greatest stages. It was to build a stable, beautiful life for his new family, a life filled with the same harmony he created with his cello. There was also Maria Flores, a young violinist from a working-class family, who had practiced until her fingers bled, seeing the orchestra as her ticket to a different life. And there was old Samuel, the timpanist, a widower who called the orchestra his reason for getting up in the morning. Each of the 98 members had a story, a network of love and obligation, a future they were building note by painstaking note. They shared cheap pizza during late-night rehearsals and celebrated birthdays with off-key singing in the practice rooms. They were bound by a shared language, the universal tongue of music, and an unshakable belief in Ilara Vance. The music they were making was transcendent, a defiant roar of talent and hope. They had everything to live for. The life that awaited them beyond the stage doors was rich with promise, a symphony of its own that was just reaching its crescendo. They had no idea it was about to be silenced forever. The day of the disappearance, October 26, 1988, began with an electric tension. It was the final full-day dress rehearsal, their last chance to perfect every note before the grand opening the following night. The air in the Orpheum Grand was thick with the smell of fresh paint, new carpet, and something else, a faint chemical odor that several musicians commented on. Arthur, the hall's quiet, hulking custodian, dismissed it as industrial cleaner. "Big night tomorrow," he'd mumbled. "Mr. Sterling wants the place to gleam." Mr. Sterling, the hall's director, was a slick, imposing figure who had overseen the venue's 9-figure renovation. He stalked the halls that day, his expensive shoes clicking on the marble, a stark contrast to the musicians' worn-down footwear. Ilara Vance pushed the orchestra relentlessly. She was a perfectionist, and she knew this performance had to be flawless. "Again," she'd command, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. "From the Adagio. I want to feel the heartbreak, people. Make the air weep." During a short break in the afternoon, David Chen, the cellist, approached Ilara with a file of papers. He looked troubled. "Ilara, I've been going over the renovation budgets, the ones the union requested. Something's not right, the numbers for the acoustic paneling, the soundproofing. They're astronomical. Fictional. This is millions, maybe tens of millions siphoned off. Ilara, distracted, waved a dismissive hand. David, not now. We can deal with Sterling and his creative accounting after the debut. Once we're the talk of the town, we'll have all the leverage we need. Just focus on the music. The music is our weapon. It was a fatal mistake. He nodded, but the worry didn't leave his eyes. As the rehearsal continued into the evening, strange things began to happen. The lights flickered twice, plunging the stage into momentary darkness. A low humming sound emanated from the ventilation system, a drone that wasn't there before. Again, Arthur the custodian was on hand to offer a benign explanation. New HVAC system, he grunted. Still working out the kinks. The final piece on their program was a thunderous, powerful composition. As Ilara raised her baton for the final crescendo, a fine, almost invisible mist began to seep from the vents above the stage. It was odorless, colorless. The musicians, lost in the intensity of the music, barely noticed. The timpanist, Samuel, was the first to falter, his powerful arms suddenly feeling like lead. He slumped over his drums. Then the violinist, Maria, swayed, her bow clattering to the floor. One by one, in the middle of the most triumphant passage of music they had ever played, the members of the Orpheum Grand Orchestra collapsed. Ilara Vance was the last one standing, her baton held high, her eyes wide with confusion as her family of musicians fell into silence around her. Then, her own knees buckled, and the world went black. The last sound in the Orpheum Grand wasn't a note of music, but the soft thud of her body hitting the stage. The following evening, the Orpheum Grand was a sea of glittering gowns and black tie suits. A palpable buzz filled the lobby as Chicago's elite city officials and music critics gathered for the most anticipated cultural event of the year. The bells chimed, signaling the audience to take their seats. The house lights dimmed. A single spotlight hit the rich red curtain, and then, nothing. 5 minutes passed. The audience began to murmur, shifting in their velvet seats. 10 minutes. The murmurs grew to a confused chatter. Backstage, panic was setting in. The stage manager, a frantic man named Bill, was sweating through his tuxedo. "Where are they?" he hissed into his headset. "Check the dressing rooms again. Check the green room." He ran down the hallway himself, banging on doors. "Ilara, 5 minutes to curtain, let's go." He pushed open the door to Ilara Vance's private dressing room. It was empty. A silk shawl was draped over a chair. A score, filled with her frantic notes, lay open on the vanity. Her purse was on the table. He sprinted to the orchestra's communal dressing areas. He found a ghost town. Jackets were on hooks, wallets and keys sat on benches. A deck of cards was splayed mid-game on a table. In the instrument locker, every single case was present. The priceless Stradivarius, the custom-made cello, the gleaming brass horns, all there. They hadn't just left. They had vanished, leaving everything behind. Bill's breathing grew ragged. This wasn't a delay. This wasn't a prank. This was wrong. He radioed the hall director, Mr. Sterling, who came striding backstage, his face a mask of controlled fury. "What is the meaning of this, Bill? Is this some kind of union stunt?" "They're gone, sir," Bill stammered, his voice trembling. "Everyone. They're all gone." Sterling's eyes darted around the empty rooms, a flicker of something unreadable in his gaze. He walked onto the darkened stage, the empty chairs and silent music stands like a vast, silent graveyard. The curtain remained down. Finally, a flustered Mr. Sterling was forced to walk out in front of the curtain and address the baffled audience, announcing with a strained voice that the performance was canceled due to unforeseen circumstances. The initial reaction was anger, then confusion. But as word spread that 98 people had simply ceased to exist within the building, that confusion curdled into a cold, creeping dread. The first 911 call was placed by Bill, the stage manager, his voice cracking with disbelief. "They're all gone. The whole orchestra. They're just gone." The impossible had happened. The initial police response was one of bewildered skepticism. When the first officers arrived at the Orpheum Grand, they expected to find a hostage situation or a convoluted labor dispute. Instead, they found an enigma. The concert hall was a sealed box. There were no signs of forced entry. All doors were locked from the inside, with the exception of the main entrance, which was manned by security who saw nothing unusual. The building's staff, including the custodian Arthur and the director Mr. Sterling, were questioned. Their stories were simple. The orchestra finished their rehearsal around 9 p.m. the previous night, and everyone assumed they had gone home. The search of the building began. It was a monumental task. The Orpheum Grand was a labyrinth of corridors, rehearsal rooms, storage closets, and forgotten passages from its earlier incarnation in the 1920s. Canine units swept the building, but the dogs found no scent trails leading outside. They would follow a musician's scent from their dressing room to the stage, and then the trail would simply stop, as if the person had been lifted into the air. Detectives dusted for prints and analyzed the scene, but found nothing but the orchestra's own belongings. The investigation quickly became a national media sensation. The headline was irresistible: "The Phantom Orchestra of Chicago." Theories exploded. Were they a cult that had performed a mass suicide? Had they been abducted by a foreign government? Was it a publicity stunt of unprecedented scale? The families of the missing musicians descended on the hall, their faces etched with terror and disbelief. Sarah Chen, David's pregnant wife, clutched his cello case, her knuckles white. He would never just leave, she wept to reporters. He was going to be a father. He wouldn't leave us. The official investigation was plagued by conflict and incompetence. The sheer scale of 98 simultaneous missing persons cases overwhelmed the Chicago Police Department. Jurisdictional squabbles with the FBI created delays and lost leads. Mr. Sterling and the Hall's board of directors hired a high-powered legal team that seemed more interested in controlling the narrative and protecting the Orpheum's reputation than in assisting the police. They consistently downplayed any possibility of foul play within the building, pushing the theory of a mass defection or a planned stunt. The search of the hall itself was thorough, but flawed. Investigators relied on the building's official blueprints, provided by Sterling's office. These blueprints showed a standard concert hall structure. No hidden rooms, no secret passages. They tapped walls and checked every square inch, but the plans they were using were a lie. Days turned into weeks. The search yielded nothing. The police were stumped. The families were growing more desperate and angry, and the media frenzy was turning the tragedy into a spectacle. The frustration of the lead detective was captured on a hot mic during a press conference. "It's like they evaporated. 98 people don't just evaporate." The formal search was quietly wound down after 3 months. With no bodies, no suspects, and no credible leads, the Orpheum Grand Orchestra had officially vanished. The years that followed were cold and silent. The Orpheum Grand Concert Hall, once a symbol of artistic ambition, became a monument to an unsolved horror. It never reopened. The velvet seats collected dust, the grand chandelier grew dim, and the stage remained empty, a silent testament to the music that died there. The case of the vanished orchestra became Chicago's most enduring ghost story, a piece of grim local folklore. Teenagers would dare each other to sneak onto the property at night, hoping to hear the faint, ghostly strains of a cello or a violin. The building itself was nicknamed the Tomb. For the families, the passage of time offered no healing, only the dull, constant ache of not knowing. Sarah Chen gave birth to a son, naming him David Jr. She raised him on stories of the brilliant, kind father he would never meet, a man frozen in time at age 32. She and the other families formed a tight-knit, grief-stricken community. They held vigils every October 26th outside the chained gates of the Orpheum, their small gathering a stark contrast to the massive crowds that had once clamored to get in. They lobbied politicians and pleaded with police, but the case was ice cold. Without new evidence, there was nothing to be done. The emotional toll was immense. Marriages crumbled under the strain. Parents died without ever learning the fate of their children. The story became a weight they carried every day, a constant presence of absence. David Jr. grew up in the shadow of the Orpheum. To him, it wasn't a ghost story. It was the place that had swallowed his father. He became an architect, perhaps subconsciously trying to understand the spaces that can hold such secrets. The world moved on. New skyscrapers rose in Chicago, new music filled other halls, and new tragedies captured the public's attention. But for a small, dedicated group, time stood still in 1988. The mystery became a part of the city's identity, a wound that never closed. The 98 musicians were trapped in a narrative limbo, neither alive nor dead, their final notes echoing in the space between memory and mystery. The hope that had once filled the concert hall was replaced by a deep, abiding hopelessness, a silence that lasted for over 3 decades. For 37 years, the Orpheum Grand stood silent, a decaying relic on prime real estate. By 2025, the city had had enough. The derelict building was condemned, slated for demolition to make way for a sleek, modern commercial tower. The property was purchased by a powerful development firm, Nexus Corp. The remaining families of the vanished orchestra protested, a final, desperate plea to preserve the site, but their voices were drowned out by the march of progress. The end of the Orpheum seemed to be the final, definitive end of the story, but it was just the beginning of the answer. Before the wrecking balls could swing, a demolition survey team was sent in to perform routine structural analysis. Their job was to map the building's bones, the plumbing, the electrical, the structural supports, to ensure a safe and controlled takedown. A young technician named Leo was in charge of the ground-penetrating radar, GPR, scan. It was a tedious job, wheeling the lunchbox-sized device over dusty floors and along crumbling walls. He was scanning the area behind the main stage, a massive 30-foot-high wall designed for acoustic baffling. The blueprints he was using, digital copies of the same flawed plans from 1988, showed it as a solid concrete and plaster structure. But his monitor told a different story. The GPR was picking up a massive void, a huge rectangular anomaly deep inside the wall, roughly 60 feet long and 40 feet wide. It wasn't a utility shaft. It wasn't a structural feature. It was a room that didn't exist on any official documents. He ran the scan again, his heart starting to beat a little faster. The readings were consistent. More chillingly, the GPR detected organic matter inside the void, dense scattered returns that were inconsistent with building materials. His training told him it could be anything: rotting wood, water damage, bundled insulation. But his gut, steeped in the local folklore of the Phantom Orchestra, screamed something else. He called his supervisor. "You need to see this, the backstage wall. There's something in it, something big." The supervisor was skeptical, but the data was undeniable. Work was halted immediately. What began as a routine demolition survey had just become a potential crime scene, 37 years in the making. A single, unexpected radar pulse had pierced through decades of silence, reopening the coldest case in Chicago's history. The catalyst wasn't a confession or a long-lost clue. It was the hum of modern technology, stumbling upon a secret that had been sealed in concrete and silence. Hope, a feeling long extinguished, flickered back to life. The demolition of the Orpheum Grand was halted under a court order. A perimeter was established, and a sense of grim anticipation settled over the city. The news of the anomaly in the wall spread like wildfire, and the children and grandchildren of the missing musicians gathered at the police tape, their faces a mixture of hope and terror. A specialized forensic archaeology team, the kind usually sent to excavate ancient tombs, was brought in. They approached the backstage wall not with sledgehammers, but with the delicate tools of their trade. Using the GPR scans as a map, they drilled a small borehole into the concrete at a precise point. Fiber optic camera was fed through the opening. On the monitor, the team watched in breathless silence as the camera pushed through crumbling plaster into absolute darkness. When the small LED light on the camera flickered on, a collective gasp went through the command tent. It was a room, and it was filled with people. The decision was made to breach the wall. Carefully, methodically, the team cut a large, man-sized section out of the thick concrete and soundproofing. As the final piece was lifted away, a rush of stale, cold air escaped, carrying a faint antiseptic odor. The forensic team, clad in full hazmat suits, were the first to enter. The scene inside was surreal, a perfectly preserved tableau of horror. The entire Orpheum Grand Orchestra was there, all 98 of them. Some were slumped in chairs that had been brought in, others lay on the floor. They were not skeletons. The airtight, temperature-controlled environment had created a bizarre state of mummification, preserving their bodies with eerie detail. They still wore their rehearsal clothes from that October night in 1988. Ilara Vance lay near the center, her wild hair fanned out around her. her hand still loosely clutching her conductor's baton. David Chen was next to his cello, his head resting against the instrument's body as if he had simply fallen asleep. It was a tomb, meticulously designed and flawlessly executed. The investigation exploded with new energy. This wasn't a vanishing, it was a mass murder. Forensics quickly determined the cause of death was asphyxiation, but first, incapacitation by a potent, aerosolized anesthetic gas. They found the delivery system, modified ventilation ducts, cleverly hidden within the wall, that led directly into the sealed chamber. The question was no longer what happened, but who. Who had the means, motive, and opportunity to build a secret tomb inside a concert hall and seal 98 people inside? The focus turned to the men who built the Orpheum, the director, Mr. Sterling, and the board. Investigators unearthed the original pre-renovation blueprints from the city archives. Cross-referencing them with the doctored plans Sterling had provided in 1988, they found the discrepancy. The hidden chamber was a purpose-built addition, labeled on the original architect's private drafts as an acoustic resonance vault. It was a lie. A police task force fanned out, tracking down the surviving individuals connected to the hall's 1988 management. They found Arthur, the custodian, in a low-income nursing home on the city's outskirts. He was 89, frail and haunted. At first he denied everything, but when shown a photo of the recovered musicians, he crumbled. Through tears, he confessed. "Sterling paid me $10,000, he whispered. He said it was an acoustic test. He told me after the rehearsal, I was to engage a final lock on a service panel backstage, and then go home and say nothing. I heard hissing, but I did what I was told. I needed the money. I swear I never knew what was in there." His confession provided the leverage they needed. It was the key that unlocked the entire conspiracy. With Arthur's testimony, the meticulously constructed wall of lies built by the Orpheum's 1988 Board of Directors came crashing down. Investigators, armed with new warrants, raided the homes of the 3 surviving board members, including the now retired and fabulously wealthy Mr. Sterling. In a hidden safe in Sterling's mansion, they found what they were looking for: a second set of books for the Orpheum's renovation, and a signed memorandum from 1987. The documents laid the conspiracy bare in cold corporate language. The renovation of the Orpheum Grand had been a massive embezzlement and money laundering scheme. Sterling and his board had funneled nearly $40 million in public and private funds through shell companies, billing the project for fictitious materials and labor. The acoustic resonance vault was their insurance policy. It was designed from the beginning as a disposal site, a fail-safe in case their fraud was ever discovered. The motive for the mass murder was chillingly simple: self-preservation. David Chen, the brilliant and meticulous cellist, had, through his role as union representative, uncovered the fraud. He had found the wildly inflated invoices and traced the shell corporations. He confided in his conductor, Ilara Vance, and a few other senior members of the orchestra. He was planning to go to the district attorney and the press the day after their debut performance. Sterling, likely tipped off by a bugged phone or an informant, learned of David's plan. The board was faced with ruin and long prison sentences. Their solution was not just to eliminate David Chen, but to eliminate everyone he might have spoken to. They couldn't risk leaving a single witness. The entire orchestra had to be silenced. The plan was monstrous. They used their control over the building systems to pump the anesthetic gas through the customized vents during the final rehearsal. While the 98 musicians were unconscious, a small, loyal crew hired by Sterling, including the custodian Arthur, who locked the final door, moved their bodies and their instruments into the pre-built tomb. They sealed the wall, confident their secret was buried forever in concrete. They feigned shock and confusion, directed the police investigation away from themselves, and then collected the insurance money on the now-defunct concert hall. It was a crime of breathtaking arrogance and greed. The arrests of the elderly white-haired men who had orchestrated the massacre were broadcast live. They showed no remorse, only the cold fury of being caught. The why was finally answered. It wasn't a ghost story or a mystery. It was a calculated corporate execution, where 98 human lives were weighed against millions of dollars and found to be worth less. The revelation sent a shockwave of grief and rage through the world. But for the families, it brought a strange, agonizing peace. The uncertainty that had haunted them for 37 years was finally over. The knowing was a brutal comfort. Sarah Chen, now a grandmother, stood with her son, David Jr., at a press conference. She didn't speak of anger or revenge. She spoke of her husband. He was a hero, she said, her voice steady. He saw something wrong and he was going to make it right. They didn't just kill an orchestra. They killed 98 families, but they couldn't kill the truth. The truth finally found a way out. David Jr., the architect who grew up in the shadow of a building that held his father's tomb, became the family's spokesperson. He worked with the city to design a memorial. It wasn't a statue or a plaque. On the site where the Orpheum once stood, a public music garden was built. At its center were 98 empty chairs, arranged as they would have been on stage, facing a conductor's podium. Once a year, on October 26th, the recovered and restored instruments were placed on those chairs. A string quartet would play a single quiet piece, but for the main event, there was only silence. It was a silence that spoke of the music that was stolen, of the futures that were erased. It was a silence that screamed louder than any symphony. There were moments of profound personal closure. The son of Maria, the young violinist, was given her instrument. He had never learned to play, but he held it, tracing the lines of the wood, finally holding the dream his mother had died for. The granddaughter of Samuel, the timpanist, found a photograph tucked inside his instrument case, a picture of him and his late wife, the one he had told his friends he was so excited to be reunited with one day. The overwhelming emotion was not just relief, but a deep, sorrowful reckoning with the years lost, the lives unlived. The mystery was solved, but the void remained. The answers had come, but they could not bring back the dead. The case of the Orpheum Grand Orchestra became more than just a famous crime. It became a cautionary tale for the modern age. It served as a horrifying illustration of the depths of corporate malfeasance, a chilling example of how human lives can be reduced to collateral damage on a balance sheet. The story forced a national conversation about accountability and the hidden corruption that can fester behind polished boardroom doors. In the aftermath, sweeping new legislation was passed. The Orchestra Clause, as it became known, mandated third-party, independent verification of all blueprints for major public and private construction projects, ensuring that no secret chambers or unlisted modifications could be built without oversight. Whistleblower protection laws were strengthened, with David Chen's name often invoked as a martyr for corporate integrity. The legacy of Alara Vance and her musicians was not the debut they never had, but the profound changes their tragedy enacted. They were remembered not just as victims, but as catalysts. Their silenced symphony sparked a movement. The story is a stark reflection on the nature of evil. It wasn't the work of a deranged madman, but of rational, educated men in expensive suits who made a calculated business decision. It reminds us that the greatest threats don't always come with a warning. Sometimes they come with a handshake and a smile. Ultimately, the legacy of the vanished orchestra is a testament to the enduring power of truth. For 37 years, it was buried under concrete and lies, but it could not be extinguished. It waited patiently to be found, proving that no secret is safe forever, and no crime can truly be silenced. The music of the Orpheum Grand Orchestra was silenced for 37 years, but their story now serves as a permanent, deafening alarm against greed and inhumanity. The truth, in the end, was the most powerful note they ever played. If this case and its chilling resolution struck you, please show your support by liking this video and sharing it with others who need to hear this story. Subscribe to our channel for more true crime mysteries that uncover the darkest secrets. Now we want to hear from you. Tell us in the comments, what part of this conspiracy do you find the most shocking?